Politics, not a big story. Newt Gingrich, the former speaker, is kicking his flagging campaign into a drive ahead of the Louisiana primary on Saturday and taking aim at frontrunner Mitt Romney. And he joins me now. Mr. Speaker, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm going to get to the campaign in just a moment. I do want to ask you, though, about this increasingly controversial story involving the shooting of Trayvon Martin. Seems to be, I wouldn't even say dividing America. America seems to be pretty well on the same page here, that what has happened here is an outrage. What is your view?
Well, my view is that the local district attorney is doing exactly the right thing. He's taking it to the grand jury. I'm sure he's going to present the evidence and not just the 911 call, but the previous 911 calls and the fact that the police have been dealing with this guy apparently for a year. I think that I have faith that the American system of justice will in fact work, and that this is why you have a balance between the police and the district attorney. The district attorney has the ability to step in and say, wait a second, let's look at this again. They're clearly doing that. The police chief himself has been suspended, and I think that Americans can recognize that while this is a tragedy, and it is a tragedy, that we're going to relentlessly seek justice, and I think that's the right thing to do.
But isn't this stand your ground law a load of old nonsense, dangerous nonsense that's now being abused left, right and centre by people who just want to shoot people?
I think, Piers, you just took an enormous jump. That's like cities that have rules that even if somebody breaks into your house, you can't defend yourself. Both extremes taken in the wrong direction are false. Clearly, you should have a right to defend yourself in your own home, and clearly somebody should not be translating standing their own ground into pushing somebody else. And that's what's going to come down to the question. The young man apparently was not following the person who's being investigated. Apparently, the shooter was following the young man. Now, that's a stand your own ground. That's a chase the other person into their ground. And I think you're going to find that the law, as interpreted normally, doesn't apply to this case. But again, you and I are talking without having heard the grand jury evidence, without having listened to the various experts, without having reviewed the material. That's why I prefer, let's let the district attorney move forward, let the grand jury reach a decision. If they decide to indict him, it'll go to trial. And I think we will all see that the system of justice will work.
Let's get back to the campaign. What people are saying is, look, Newt Gingrich cannot win the nomination. He had a great fight. He's been dead and buried and roared back and dead and buried and roared back. But right now it looks almost impossible that you can win. Why are you staying in the race? And secondly, at what point politically does it become damaging to you to continue to stay in the race if the current rate of delegate gains and state wins by Mitt Romney continues at the pace that it's now happening?
Well, there are three answers. First, I'm staying in the race because I believe we ought to have a conservative who's serious, who's had national achievements, and who doesn't write his policy on an Etch-a-Sketch and zigzag back and forth wildly. I've had a consistent conservative policy going all the way back to Barry Goldwater in 1964 when I was a college student. I've been actively involved in the conservative movement. I stand for the same things year after year, and I think the most recent comments by Governor Romney's communications director should worry every conservative in the country if they're really going to nominate somebody who thinks you can, shake the Etch-a-Sketch and end up with a brand new general election campaign, which would be a total disaster in my judgment. Second, we have 176,000 donors. People walk up to me every single day and beg me to stay in the race. Every single event we go to, people thank me for having the courage to stay in the race. And third, there may be a morning Governor Romney has a majority of the delegates. That morning isn't here. Given mistakes like this week, given the fact that when he did win Illinois with less than a majority of the vote, it was the lowest turnout in 70 years. I mean, every Republican who wants to beat Obama should be worried by the fact that Romney victories come by driving down turnout with negative advertising, drowning his opponents. He will not be able to do this to Obama, and it makes me really worry about what kind of a general election candidate he'll be.
Now, we'll take a short break, Mr. Speaker, and come back and talk to you about the fact that Robert De Niro has this afternoon branded you a hypocrite. I want to get your reaction.
Okay.
He's a raging bull tonight.
about is the behavior of people like Gingrich. Gingrich is just a hypocrite. And, and that's a waste of energy for all of us. And he's said publicly that the president shouldn't have to apologize to anybody just a few weeks ago. I mean, something about this. It's just nonsense.
Robert De Niro taking a pot shot at Newt Gingrich today over the First Lady joke that's been in the news this week. Newt Gingrich, how do you respond to the charge from one of Hollywood's great actors that you are a hypocrite?
Well, first of all, no matter what words go back and forth between us, Clint and I were delighted to be at the Kennedy Center Honors when he was honored. He is one of our greatest actors. I truly admire his professional work, even if I don't like him particularly in politics. But he just took two things. I mean, this is a classic Hollywood lack of logical thought. I said the President of the United States should not apologize to our enemies while they are killing young Americans. Now, that's a very specific reference to a very specific situation. The Commander-in-Chief owes it to the troops under his command to stand with them. And I thought the President made a tremendous mistake during the killings in Afghanistan because there were people who were killing young Americans and he's apologizing to them. That has nothing to do with requesting that Robert De Niro, who the White House itself had said that he said the wrong things, took three perfectly fine women and compared them to Michelle Obama in a way that basically talked about white first ladies. And my only point was, I made 2 points about this. First, it was really the wrong thing for him to say, and the White House apparently has agreed. And second, this campaign isn't about first ladies. I'm not running against Michelle Obama. I'm not running, and I think that Ann Romney and Karen Cansarum and Callista Gingrich are perfectly fine as potential first ladies. I happen to have a preference for Callista. But the point is, this is about Michelle's husband. This is about President of the United States. I'm running to be President of the United States. And I just thought that De Niro's quote was in bad taste. If it had been a conservative talk radio show host who said exactly the same thing but reversed the racial reference, the left would have exploded with rage. But of course, if it's one of their own, and after all, it's only attacking Republicans, that's perfectly appropriate because anybody on the left, as Bill Maher has proven, can say anything they want to about anyone and still give a million. And after all, who are we to judge those on the left who are so morally superior that their use of language is always correct?
But isn't there a slight danger of you being overly pious here, Mr. Speaker? Because I think you knew that he was basically coming out with what I would call a reverse racism joke. And the reason I say you may be a little too serious about this, Ann Romney was on my show last night, and she made a point of saying, I actually found it funny. I didn't find it offensive. I think that America's getting way too politically correct. And you seem to be leading this charge, Mr. Speaker. Now, I know you quite well now. You have a great sense of humour. Did you really feel offended by Robert De Niro, or was it just a chance to whack a Democrat?
I really think the use of racism by Democrats is just as bad as the use of racism by Republicans. And I really think it's wrong to use racial references like that, period. I think, as I said, just try sometimes saying exactly the same phrase, but reverse the reference. Imagine that somebody had said in the funniest possible way in 2008 that America wasn't ready for a black first lady. You'd have had an explosion.
Yeah, but that's the whole point. Now, hang on. This is the whole point, though, because the whole point of De Niro's comment, his joke, was precisely because many people were saying that kind of thing very seriously about Michelle Obama. So he was flipping the racial taunts on their side
So flipping it. Okay, I just want to make clear here, Piers. Flipping it's always okay because it's always the left that is flipping it, and therefore the left says things that's always okay. Look, one of the reasons that I'm controversial is I'm happy to stand toe-to-toe with the left, and when they want to engage in cultural fights, I'm happy to. Do you want to explain Bill Maher the same way? That the kind of vicious, nasty things he said are okay because after all the vicious, nasty things on the left?
No, but it's interesting you mentioned Bill Maher, because he wrote a very good piece in the New York Times today precisely about America's collective sense of humor failure. I actually think that he's right in principle, although I thought he was completely wrong with the language he used about Sarah Palin, for example, in the same way that Rush Limbaugh was totally wrong when he used that language about a law student. But I just wonder whether when you first heard what Robert De Niro said, whether you really were offended? Because I'm not sure you would have been.
I really do think that it's occasionally okay for conservatives to stand up and say we don't like being smeared, and I really do think the language he was using is typical. Now, look, I get it. I understand where you're coming from, and it was not a gigantic thing. It was a very specific one-time thing. The White House itself agreed his language was inappropriate. That's what they said. So maybe you have an argument with the White House over this because they said he was inappropriate. But I just think it's interesting that if you try to have some level of policing of the left's language, suddenly you're lacking a sense of humor. Come on, you know me too well. That's baloney. I like De Niro. I just said to you, I like De Niro. I think he's a great actor. I'd much rather have a conversation with him someday about the wonderful things he's done than be involved in this kind of long-distance baloney. But his reference to me as a hypocrite took totally out of context something which was very serious, which is a commander-in-chief apologizing to people who are killing young Americans.
Let's move to Rick Santorum, because he's like your bogey man in all this. If Rick Santorum wasn't there, if he was to stand aside, do you think you'd have a better shot now at Mitt Romney? Because everyone is saying that to him about you, but the same applies to you, doesn't it?
Well, it applies both ways, but I also think, to some extent, we've actually, I think, split Romney's attention. He has always had an ability to drown us with negative advertising. And what happened to me, as you'll remember, was I was actually in first place until we got drowned first in Iowa. Then I came back and I was in first place after winning South Carolina. And then they spent $20 million in 3 weeks in Florida to re-drown me. And that was the process in which Rick emerged, because he was the guy running fourth and Romney wasn't paying any attention to him. Rick then got a really good bounce and ran, I think, a very positive campaign for a while. Now he's suffering a similar kind of challenge. And the question is whether or not between us, Ron Paul and Rick and I, can get enough votes to stop Romney from an absolute majority. If he does, I mean, Romney's challenge is simple. If he does not get an absolute majority, having run for 6 years, put in $40 million own money, outraised us by huge amounts in his super PAC, if he doesn't have an absolute majority on the 26th of June, we're going to move towards an open convention, and then it's anybody's game. If he does get an absolute majority, he'll be the Republican nominee, and he'll have won it in a very, very hard-fought contest.
Critics of that position would say the last thing the Republicans need is to get to the convention and have open season. That just plays completely into Barack Obama's hands.
That would be the most exciting 60 days of civic participation in the age of Facebook and YouTube. I mean, you would be in hog's heaven. Every night would be exciting. The convention would be the most exciting convention in modern times. And whoever became the nominee would have the highest attendance, the highest viewership in history for their acceptance speech, and we would have compressed the Obama attack machine to 60 days. They would only have 60 days. I mean, the danger, frankly, for the Republicans is if we pick a nominee early enough, that gives Obama's $1 billion a long time to work on defining that candidate. Remember, the Republican nominee was picked much earlier in 2008, and Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton fought it out to mid-June. Didn't seem to hurt Obama.
Speaker Gingrich, I admire your fortitude enormously. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I would make it up with Robert De Niro. He's a big lad.
Thank you.
He's got a tasty right hook.
I like him. I like him a lot.
Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.